Welcome to Dom's wonderful evaluation. This is my final piece for the graphics project that I've just completed. It shows a method of how to cook Dommy biscuits, which is myself made into biscuit form. My inspiration behind the piece started off with the research. It was all about looking at the use of graphics and functional purposes such as leaflets and maps, diagrams and technical drawings. I learned the importance of image. Adding an image to text makes the text easier to understand. It is instantly recognisable and eye-catching. People will often look at a picture on a poster before reading its message. Images cross boundaries, language, age and culture, and the oldest form of communication. This image here is a cooking recipe for runny chocolate cake. The instructions inspired me most, as this sort of idea was new to me. It had minimal words and more pictures with just a few labels to portray the important messages that couldn't be portrayed with just pictures. It's quite colourful, and I like the step-by-step nature. It's also quite feminine with the pink colours, and I thought it was aimed probably at a young female audience rather than a sort of an older male audience, for example. As the work is about me, I thought quite a feminine piece would be a good place to start. The brief for this piece was to create illustrative artwork that represents you as an artist. I chose to think about the project as sort of like a personal CV, in sort of like a visual CV. And to use as many techniques as possible, which is why I started by thinking about what was important to me, and I decided that my pets were very important to me. As I'd interpreted it as a personal sort of a statement or CV, I wanted to be very visual, and to do this I started off with my cat Thomas. This is a picture of him, and I went over it using the pen tool. I opened it up in a new document to begin with, and added a new layer, and traced over the photograph using the pen tool. I had no stroke and a black fill. I repeated this process for his eye, but used 70% transparency on the fill, which I thought just represented the sort of slightly glassy effect that cat's eyes have. I used the anchor tools quite well in this piece, and dragged them to alter the shape, but I found I had too many anchors and had to remove some using the remove anchor tool. I next added a new layer and brought the order of this layer to the top. This was so I could add some detail with the paintbrush. I use a thick stroke of 4 points, increased from 1. This is so I could have a sort of quite shaggy, almost fur-like texture to Thomas's face. I wasn't overall happy with the turnout of this, as where I'd gone over the lines there were darker patches. If I were to do this bit again, I would try and make sure I didn't go over the lines that I'd previously made, so I could have a slightly cleaner look to the finish. The final stage of creating Thomas was to add a label to his side. Again, I added a new layer and arranged this so it was on the top. I drew an arc using the arc tool, but left it with no stroke so it had no visible line on the side of the cat. I selected the text tool and used the text on a path tool, option for this. I used Rage Italic in 24-point font to add the script-like appearance to the side of Thomas. I chose to give it Thomas the Kitty, as that's a name I often called him, and the elegant script-like font was to represent how elegant I thought he looked when he walked. This is a picture of the whole Thomas I made, highlighted so you can see all the anchor points that I used to create him. And this is him in situ on my final piece. I do like the overall look of him because I've captured the bemused look that he always seems to wear on his face, but perhaps the transparency to his tail, where you could see the rainbow through, was not quite as strong. It's not overly noticeable when you view the whole piece, but as I know it's there, I think I could have improved it by increasing the transparency so this was not as obvious. This is one of my biscuit faces. When creating my piece, I thought about what sort of recipe I would be, what sort of food thing that I would be, and I came on the decision that biscuits would probably be the best one. To make my biscuit faces, I used quite a lot of techniques. I started off in the same way as with the Thomas, and used a photograph and overlapped this with a pen tool. I did this a second time on a separate layer for the hat, so I could turn off the previous layer using the eye tool on the side of the layer taskbar. This is so I could turn off this layer and see the photograph underneath so I could get the hat to look accurate. I chose this picture for my biscuits as this is my Facebook profile picture, and as such I thought it was one of the best pictures to choose to represent me, as people who know me already know this as a picture of me. When creating the hat, I used a fill of yellow with a sort of a dark biscuity outline, and I actually used the mouse to direct the anchor points this time, rather than the pen and digital pen tool that I used for the Thomas. I gave both layers a 70% transparency, and the base biscuit a gradient to it, from a lighter brown to a darker brown, as I thought this represented the surface of a biscuit when it's been baked. I often use layer management to change the order and turn layers off and on as required, and locking layers as well with the padlock looking option on the taskbar. This is so I didn't accidentally change pieces of my work that I was happy with. When it came to saving my work, I saved my work in different places all at once. I saved it on my memory stick and backed it up on my P drive and hard drive. This is so if anything happened to, say, my memory stick, I always had copies and I didn't lose my work. Here you can see it being saved as a PNG file, which is good for editing, but still easy to print from. In the background, you can see the grey tray. I chose quite a flat 2D effect to my tray, as this sort of represented the same sort of style from my inspirational cooking recipe. However, I did try a gradient, but it just did not look right. I could not get the gradient to fit in the places where it would look the best, and decided that a plain tray looked better. I used additional digital skills on my biscuit face, such as shape formation, by using the circle or eclipse tool, and also did quite a bit of scaling using the shift button to keep proportion accurate. I also used quite a bit of repetition or duplicating in this case. I used the Alt key and clicked and dragged to duplicate my biscuit face. As I wanted the image to look like a tray of biscuits, I duplicated it twice to have a cluster of 3. I find odd numbers always more appealing than even numbers. I wanted the arrangement to look like the biscuits had been dropped back onto the plate, perhaps by greedy hands desperate to try it. So I placed the third biscuit on top of the previous biscuit, and also messed with the order of the biscuits just to make them look like they were on top and underneath each other. I rotated the topmost biscuit additionally, as this made it look again more placed. I then made a bite mark on my first biscuit. I did this by creating a teardrop shape and then duplicating this shape 3 times to form the 3 crests, 3 main crests of the biscuit bite. I next used the Pathfinder tool. I selected all the teardrops and then used the merge option. This merged all 3 of the teardrops together and made them one shape. After uniting the shape, I gave it an outline on the biscuit to represent the marks teeth leave behind in food when it's bitten. I used again the arc tool and with a thick stroke to create these indents. Now I'm going to talk about my background. I then set up a new document. This time it was for the purposes of constructing my final piece. I wanted to have a nice clean piece that I could add all my individual elements to. I used the pink colour, which is similar to the pink in the cooking recipe that inspired me. However, I chose a more sort of orange tone, as I'm not that girly and it's supposed to be about me. Again, I used the arc tool to form an arc, and again with no stroke, so I left no line. I used the text tool on a path and used a red font, as this is my favourite colour. I also thought this would make the title stand out quite well. The shape of the background was a rectangle, but with curved edges. I used no stroke and just a fill to create a bold block of colour. The farthest background is just a plain white, as I wanted a page effect, as it's almost just been come straight from a cookbook. I placed the biscuits on top with a new layer and named the layer biscuits. I named the layer as this is good practice for layer management. Before I even started making my design, I wrote up my recipe and ingredients. I tried to make it quite humorous, as I thought this would make it memorable, and that's the sort of thing that you're aiming for within a CV, to make you memorable and more likely to achieve your position that you're aiming for. I made it as complete about me as possible, with my interests, a bit of personality, and also some achievements. When selecting the font, I cycled through the fonts and sizes, trying to get a font which matched the sort of the pictures in my image. There was quite a lot of writing, so I tried to get the page to stretch a bit. I thought the more space, the less chance there was of making the writing too bunched up, which made it more daunting. The colour coordination within the piece, I used sort of red and black as the writing, as I didn't want it to stick out, but I wanted it to stand out. To make sure that my writing again wasn't too grouped closely together, I changed the spacing between the letters of the script, because as it was quite hard to read. This last image here is the text box that comes up when you're trying to alter the spacing between the images. This is my text in situ and my first draft. Once all the text was typed out, I added a line to separate the ingredients, which I thought looked quite stunning, as the red really linked in with the titles and led the eye away from the big group of text. I also then added my biscuits and my Thomas, just to make sure that everything was where I wanted to be when I added the text. The next step was adding the hand-drawn icons into my work. To do this, I drew the image out onto a piece of paper and then added a black fine liner over the top. This just made the image stand out more for the scanner. Once scanned, I uploaded the image into Photoshop and increased the contrast and decreased the brightness, which again just made the outline darker and then made it easier to work with. I named each image and placed it in my final image in its own layer with a corresponding name. This just made it easier to alter the levels of my work and to make it easier to adjust an individual item, and much easier to find. Once I pasted the image into my work, I live traced and expanded it and then live painted it until it looked as stunning as my biscuit faces. I added detail with the paintbrush tool and repeated all these steps for the other hand-drawn editions. I next added some warping and scaling on the crumbs. I drew a simple crumb shape with a pen tool and added a gradient to match the gradient on the biscuit surface. I thought crumbs would add another element to my tray and make the biscuit idea look more realistic. I chose the fisheye warp style on the crumb, as this was a familiar technique to me, as I'd already used fisheye in photography and knew that this would be the right sort of warping that I required. I then adjusted the sliding bars to make the angles quite jagged. I was actually really pleased with how this turned out. I probably could have done this by hand with the pen tool, but I think it would have taken longer and it would not have looked as good. I could have also scanned in an image of the crumb and gone from there, but I wanted to keep it digital and show off the different techniques. I then just finished off the design by adding a piping bag in yellow to represent the icing of the hat, and also a blue bubble style text box underneath my text, which again was inspired by the research I conducted. The cooking recipe had a sense of flow, and I wanted to create the same sense within my own work. I think I did this quite well, as I definitely added a direction to the writing and separated the recipe from the decoration, which gave it more importance. The next stage of work was to bring up our final images and have a sort of a class critique on each other's work. It's just helped us find the final finishing touches and give us a little bit of direction on the finishing of our pieces. After this peer criticism session, I had a few tweaks to make on my work. The first was the font. I'd used the script MT bold in a 20-point font, but it was still quite hard to read, despite the alterations to my letter spacing. I changed it to the Sego print in regular format, size 16. This was a lot clearer, and this image just shows the difference between the joined script type writing and the separated letter writing. My second tweak was the colour to the backing. The blue contrasted quite a lot with the orange, and after experimenting with different colours such as pinks, purples and yellows, I settled upon a mint green. After checking with my peers and deciding that it did in fact look a lot better, I left it with the green. I was also quite happy with the green colour, as this carried on with my food theme, it being a mint green. Next, within our groups, we learnt a little bit about file formats and what sort of files to use when saving. The first file I looked at was the PNG. Here, I saved my image with a white background. I could have saved it with a transparent background, which would have left just the image, but I preferred to have a white background as this was sort of the cookbook page sort of idea that I was going with. This second image is an example of saving my image as an EPS file. This is a vector file and saves the image in a vector rather than in the sort of rasterized and pixelated sort of format. And this is my final image. Overall, I'm actually very pleased with my work. I think it's got quite a lot of successes, such as overcoming knowledge barriers. I did this by looking at tutorials in my own time, learning how to do the different techniques and just practicing them and getting a lot better. I made a lot of adjustments to my work and I was constantly evolving the piece, asking people's opinions and just taking a step back and looking at it, which I think made it stronger. There's quite a lot of drawing in my image, lots of visual aspects, both digitally and manually, which I think adds fun and interest to the piece. I also think that means it is more suitable for a wider range of purposes. The colour and cartoon style, again, just adds fun, and I think it showcases my own sort of unique graphic style. I also think it's quite a clever idea and innovative. I don't think anyone else in my class did anything similar, and I haven't seen anything similar, which makes it quite unique, having my own spin upon the brief. There are some weaknesses to my piece. The tray isn't instantly obvious what it is, which I think can take away some of the meaning of my biscuits. And I think that could be because it's a little bit flat. Adding some shadows to my tray and to the whisk and bowl, for an example, could have added some depth to my decorations. Additionally, having Thomas on the image doesn't instantly know what that's about and seems a little bit disjointed. Once reading through my piece, it does become obvious, but he could have been a little bit more sort of obvious from the beginning what he was about. At times I felt limited during the making of this piece, as there was so much I wanted to do but was unsure about how to do, and some things I didn't know how to describe to find a tutorial about. And it may have been easier to create the image on paper, but I think once it was finished, that this image is a lot stronger than a paper image would have been, as it is easier to transfer onto things such as leaflets or posters, and a lot easier to sort of get sort of online and seen, really, to sort of get exposure. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And that was my final piece.